One question that I've heard passed around right now is the pandemic over? To what extent? Is it over? Is it still ongoing? When will the pandemic be over? This is an important question because for some of us, for someone like myself, largely the pandemic never happened. I had some minor inconveniences wearing a mask when I went to the grocery store or the doctor's office, but really it had no effect on me. And my job was not affected. I'm a truck driver. There's still cargo to be taken up and down the interstate. There's my pay was the same. My benefits were the same. It had no effect whatsoever. My brother and I were talking at one point, and he said, "Tom, here's something strange for me. I don't know anybody who's died from COVID. And yet they say people are dying all the time, and yet I don't know a single person who's died." There is a reason for that. My brother and I are largely the same. We're both empty nesters after me raising several children and him raising his children. Now the children are gone, for him long gone. And for me, my last is now gone. And we live by ourselves in these houses, and we have complete control over our exposure to the outside world. And there's a lot of people for whom that does not apply. Once I was exposed to COVID, and they said, "Tom, you stay home," and I collected sick pay during that time. But there are a whole lot of other people who would be crazy to be tested to find out if they had COVID. Why? Because if it comes back positive, they can't go into work, they can't go into work, they can't make money, while at the same time, their mortgage or their rent still has to be paid, the car insurance still has to be paid, the food still has to be paid, electric bill still has to be paid. All those bills don't care whether or not they have COVID. And so for many, many people, they'd be crazy to be tested because it would be devastating to them financially. But for my brother and me, as I say, my life was not appreciably affected. And I would say, realistically, besides very minor inconveniences, I didn't have any pandemic. I didn't have any untoward burdens that were caused by the pandemic. So that is why, when you say, "Hey, is the pandemic over? Will the pandemic be over?" I would respond, there's some people for whom, like my brother and me, the pandemic never happened appreciably. And there are some people that it was a tremendous burden. People who had to risk their lives to continue in their occupations, paramedics, frontline workers. But beyond me wiping down the steering wheel of my tractor before I left with alcohol, with an alcohol wipe that my wife made for me, I was not affected by the pandemic. Let me tell you for whom the pandemic is going on and going on strong right now. The hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are dying every month in our country. The people largely unvaccinated, and some of them people with severe comorbidities, health problems that cause them to be particularly susceptible to a pneumatic illness, to a respiratory illness. These people and all their families and all their loved ones, The pandemic is going strong for them right now. My point is, when will the pandemic be over? There are people next year who are still going to die of COVID. Maybe there'll be people who said, well, I just never got around to getting the vaccine. You know, life is kind of really busy and I just couldn't get around to it. Or there'll be others who die of the pandemic, and those will be the people for whom the pandemic keeps on going. And that person might, by some huge hole in the statistics, one of those people might be me, might be you. If we're vaccinated, probably not. But there are a lot of people for whom the pandemic is going strong, and there are other people for whom it never happened, and that is the answer to the question, when will this pandemic be over?